Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and thank you so much for watching. This past week was grad week in Canada, so today's video is going to show you how I made this Dr. Seuss Oh the Places You'll Go themed cake that I think turned out really awesome, so let's get right into it. For my bottom tier, I'm going to be carving it so it looks like it's tapering in a bit. So for the bottom layer of this cake, I'm using a 7-inch round, and for the rest of this tier, I'm using 8-inch rounds. I'm brushing on some simple syrup to keep my cake nice and moist, and then I'm just filling mine with some Swiss meringue buttercream. Because my bottom tier is quite tall and I don't want to be cutting massive pieces, I am going to dowel my cake about halfway through, and I am using a 6-inch round cake board for the center because you will be carving this cake and you don't want to be hitting that board as you're carving, so I'm just making sure that mine is smaller than that 7-inch layer we have on the bottom. I added some buttercream to help secure that board in place, and then just continue stacking your cake up. Unfortunately, my camera decided to stop filming as I was actually carving my cake, but you can see from the video all I've done is just cut away all the excess that was sticking out in the middle so that you have a smooth line from the top of your cake going down to the bottom. So you actually don't want to carve anything away from the very top of your cake, and you don't want to carve anything away from the very bottom of your cake. You just want your knife to be able to run down smoothly and go from the top to the bottom. To get that slanted top, I'm taking my knife and about halfway into that top tier, I'm just going to start cutting down and just sloping down my knife. Again, take your time, go slow. I'm really sorry that my hand and my arm is blocking a lot of this. But I'm basically just making small cuts, kind of angling my knife downwards. I basically want to find a bottom point and then connect the top and the bottom so it's a smooth slant, if that makes sense. To avoid cutting off too much, I just used one of my scrap pieces and put it on the top just to help me get a sharper angle without cutting a bunch of cake off the bottom. Once you're happy with the way it looks, I'm just setting that aside and I'm going to start on my top tier. Because this was a smaller tier, I decided not to add a layer of cake that was smaller on the bottom. I just used a cake pan in the next size down And I took the bottom out and used that as a guide while I'm cutting, and just basically followed the exact same technique that I used for the first tier. You can see that I actually have my cake flipped upside down. I find that it's a lot easier to carve outward in a slant versus inward. So that's where it really helps to have your cake chilled, because once you're done cutting, you can just put a cake board on top of that cake and flip it upside down, and it should stay in place, and it's a lot easier, I find. And then just like my first tier, I am slanting the top of this cake as well. Once I've finished with carving my cakes, I am going to crumb coat them and then set them in the fridge to chill. Now before I add my final layer of icing on my cakes, I'm going to make the cut in my bottom tier that is going to help keep my top tier in place and further accentuate that topsy-turvy look. Now this can be a bit tricky, but as long as you take your time, the whole theme of this video is take your time. It's not that hard, so just bear with me here. I have put my top tier on a piece of parchment and I just traced the bottom. And I'm going to cut that out and use that as a guide for where I'm going to be cutting into my bottom tier. So once I've traced that out with my knife, I'm going to start cutting. And on the side of the cake where it slants up at the highest point, I'm going to cut straight down until I feel roughly that it's going to be meeting the bottom point of my cake. So cut all the way around and just cut a bit shallower as you get towards that bottom slope. So when you take that piece of cake out, it's just roughly flat. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're just going to keep carving away until you just have a flat bottom for your cake to rest on. Now I'm just taking my knife and kind of leveling out that bottom bit. You can see that I hit the layer of buttercream in that cake, and I did later add some more cake to that so it wasn't coming through. You just want to get that area as flat as possible so when you add your top tier, it's not going to be crooked. You want it to sit flat. Once I got the look that I wanted, I just added some more buttercream and then just finished off crumb coating that cake and then setting that aside to chill. I'm going to finish off icing both my cakes so that they're nice and smooth, and then I am going to move on to my fondant. I have dyed my fondant using sky blue food coloring gel from Wilton, and I'm just going to roll that out on a corn-floured surface. If you find that you have some bubbles getting trapped in your fondant, you can just pop those with the pin and then smooth it out with your finger. You want to roll out your fondant to be roughly 1/8 of an inch thick. And then you're carefully going to drape your fondant over your cake, and using a fondant smoother and your hands, you're going to push all that air out from underneath the top. And because these tiers are quite tall, you want to secure the fondant around the edge of your cake because the weight of it can actually cause it to tear and crack. So if you secure that in place, then you'll have a little more time to smooth your fondant all the way down before you have to worry about it tearing. Once you have that fondant smooth all the way to the bottom, you are going to take your pizza cutter or a very sharp knife and trim away the excess. So for my bottom tier, I've dyed some fondant using leaf green from Wilton, just a light shade of green. And you're going to do the exact same thing, roll that out. If there's any bubbles, just pop them with a pin, smooth them out with your finger, and you want to get that to roughly 1/8 of an inch thick. When you're applying your fondant to your bottom tier, it will be a bit different because of that area that we cut out, but drape it over your cake, and you want to secure the top and the edges just like your first cake. And then I've smoothed down the fondant on my back, and towards the front of the cake I have just tried to get that excess air that's going to be trapped in the center out before I smooth the front of my fondant down. And you can see that I'm using a pin, and I have created a hole where I know that my top tier is going to cover it anyway. And just really gently, don't push down too hard because you will tear your fondant. Once you have a hole, just kind of guide the air out of that center space, out towards that hole, and just smooth it down against your cake very slowly. And then once all the air is pushed out, then you can continue on and smooth the rest of the fondant down against the front of your cake. Then I'm grabbing my fondant smoother and I'm just going around the sides and that top lip of my cake till it's nice and smooth, and cutting away the excess on the bottom using my pizza cutter again. I did use my fondant smoother to smooth out the top rim of that cake, and again using a pin just to get out any air that didn't get pushed out the first time. But you might find that you're having a hard time getting the top section that you cut out smooth because the fondant smoother is so rigid and the shape's not really flexible. So what helped me here is grabbing a piece of that fondant that I trimmed away and forming it into a ball, and I just rubbed it on some cornstarch so it wouldn't stick to my fondant, and then used that to kind of smooth out all those areas that your fondant smoother couldn't reach. Now that both of my cakes are covered in fondant, I'm going to stack them. Again, I'm going to dowel my cake. You need to dowel this cake just like any other tiered cake, otherwise they will collapse and you will be sad. So please do. I am using bamboo dowels again and putting them in until they hit that middle board I put in my bottom tier, and then using an edible food marker to mark where I'm going to cut so that they are flush with my cake. You can just use buttercream to help adhere your top tier to your bottom, but because this is my very first Topsy Turvy cake and I'm a scaredy cat, I am using some piping gel because I find that it dries a lot firmer and it's more like glue, so it really keeps your tiers in place. So when applying my top tier to my bottom, I made sure that it fit snugly into that area that I cut out for it. And you want to make sure that the highest points of each cake are facing away from each other to achieve that topsy-turvy look. So once you put your cakes together, they should generally look like this. If I was a bit braver, I would have tapered in the side of my cake on the top a bit more so it looked even more dramatic, but this was my first time and I think it looked pretty good. To start on my favorite part, the decorating, I am rolling out some green fondant that I did in Kelly green from Wilton. You want to make sure that it is just a darker green than your background on your bottom tier, and I am going to roll that out onto a cornstarch surface. And using my X-Acto knife, I am going to cut it into kind of a wavy, hilly shape. You just want to make sure it doesn't come more than like halfway up your top tier. You can see that I've covered my cake board in the same color green that I used for my bottom tier. There are lots of tutorials on how to do that on YouTube. I just rolled out some green fondant and ran it along my board. Normally I would cover my board completely before I put my cake on it, but this was a last minute decision because I thought it would mesh better than just the silver board. And you can see that I'm just brushing the bottom of my cake with some water to help that darker green fondant stick better. So for the next step, I'm going to add the rainbow of color wrapping around my cake, and I have tried to match the same colors used in the Oh, the Places You'll Go book. I've got light shades of orange, pink, purple, yellow, and then I used the same color green I used for my hills. Now there's two ways that you could get these on your cake. The first way is to apply them strip by strip, and that could work too. I just thought it might be easier to roll out one thicker strip of any color fondant just because these strips are going to go on top of it. And then you're going to cover that in water and then place your strips side by side so that you're just wrapping around one band of fondant and it's all going to look meshed together, and you might just have an easier time with this. So whichever way is going to work for you, you do that. Once again, my camera decided to stop filming, so unfortunately I did not get the footage of me wrapping that band of fondant around my cake, but you can see from the photo that I just marked out where I wanted to lay it down with some water, and then I picked up that long strip. It might help you to have someone. I got my boyfriend to help me make sure they have clean hands. And you are going to just wrap that around the cake however you want it to go. I ran mine along so that it would cover the cake board sticking out that was showing on my top tier. So just wrap that all the way around, and then when you get to the top, I just cut mine into a triangle end so that I could kind of swirl it at the top. Now that all of my background detailing is done, I'm going to move on to my focal points, and I'm going to start with the balloon from Oh, the Places You'll Go. I've rolled out some pink and then yellow fondant, and I'm going to cut those into strips. I just eyeballed the shape of the balloon to create a template for myself, but you could just freehand this, but I definitely do recommend a template. It makes life a lot easier. And then what I'm going to do is roll out some yellow fondant and then arrange my strips kind of in a curved shape. Again, just look at a reference photo of the balloon. And once I have all my pieces laid down, I am going to use my template to cut the shape out of the balloon. Once you're done, you're just going to set that aside to dry, and I'm going to move on to the, I guess this is the basket of the balloon. It's very Seussy, so I'm not totally sure. But I'm taking some of that pink fondant and rolling it out into a fat teardrop shape, and then I'm just creating a hole in the center of that using a balling tool. And then just using my fingers to further accentuate that opening. And I'm using my blade tool to kind of indent the sides to look a little more textured. I'm going to add that to the top of my cake while it's still movable, it's not set. And you want to have the top kind of pointing upwards because we want it to look like the balloon's about to take off and the basket's kind of dragging upwards. So you don't want to have it too flat against the cake. I do apologize for the lighting here. This was around 3 in the morning, so there was no sunlight left. For this next part, I am going to take a black edible food marker, but you could also take a fine tipped paintbrush and some food gel. And I'm just going to outline everything. I'm going to outline the hills, each strip of color going around my cake. I'm going to outline my basket and my balloon. And the great thing about this is that it doesn't need to look perfect, because if you look at the Seuss books, any Seuss books, the lines all look kind of wobbly, so you don't need to have a super steady hand. It's still going to look good. I wanted to make some Truffula trees to go along with my cake, and to do that I'm going to make some cake pops. This isn't really a cake pop tutorial, so I'm not going to get into in-depth instructions on how to make them. If you do need more details, there are lots of tutorials out there on YouTube. For mine, I have just mixed some of my cake scraps with my buttercream until I could form a ball in my hand without it crumbling. I have set those aside to firm up in the fridge for a couple of minutes, and in the meantime I have melted some candy melts in these shades that I wanted, and using a cake pop stick I dipped that into my candy melt and then in about halfway into my cake pop and let that set at room temperature. And then once that was ready, I dipped the whole thing into my candy melts and just tapped off the excess, and then I purchased some standing sugar in the same shade as my candy melt and just basically sprinkled them all over my entire cake pop and set those aside to firm up. I've inserted a skewer into my balloon and added that to my cake. You want to make sure that you let your balloon set for at least a day, if not more, to really firm up, because it will start to droop and could possibly break, which would be a disaster. I have used some floral wire to make the end of my basket with that little hand hanging off of it. I don't really know what that's about, but again, Dr. Seuss, just look at the reference photos and you will get it. I want to add the text, "Oh, the places you'll go," to my cake. Again, I just eyeballed the writing. You could cut yourself out a little template for this, but I was just happy with freehanding it. And once I have placed that on the cake in the way that I want them, you need to outline those letters as well. The final step is just adding your Truffula trees, and I added some squiggly black lines to make it look like the bark of the tree. And then you are done. This was a big cake and it's quite an undertaking, but the results are super adorable and it's really fitting for a graduation or even a baby shower or a birthday. It's a pretty iconic book and everybody loved this cake, so it's a great one to try. It is a little more challenging, but you should challenge yourself. This was definitely a challenge for me. It was the first time I've ever done a cake like this, and I'm really pleased with how it turned out. I want to thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe for new videos every week, and if you have any suggestions of what you'd like me to make, please leave them in the comment section below. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.